Now let's have a look at how they did it, and basically let's have a look into productivity killers and what it really means. So what are the top 3 productivity killers in marketing collaboration and how to fix them, right? Number 1 here, and this is something I see over and over again in my demos, in my customer conversations, is like a major or key problem is unclear communication. So on the one side, it's like not clear if you share content and ask for feedback, where and how shall they give you feedback? Do you want screenshots from them? Do you want them to call you? Do you want to have a weekly meeting with them? What is your preferred way to get their feedback? And that's a question your reviewers will always have, right? On the other side, you struggle to oversee all kind of versions in different places and really try to match that with your feedback that you have received. That's an ongoing challenge. There's often like the trouble to really track feedback basically accordingly. And I just shared that, right? Sometimes it's really hard to align contradicting feedback between different stakeholders. Now, how can you solve that? And here's a really handy productivity booster. It's all about being clear when it comes to feedback. The first thing I recommend to do is, before you start into a new marketing review collaboration project, align and define basically the feedback channel. So shall they give you feedback in person? Do you want to have a Monday meeting where you just discuss all the projects and give feedback? Shall there be a sheet they fill out? Is it screenshots? Or do you want to do it with a review and approval software, right? Then the other thing is, yes, a marketing campaign, a new content piece, maybe it's key for you and for your role and maybe even your team. But then for maybe many others in your organization, it might not be so important. Let's take legal. They have a billion things they have to do during the week, and you are just one thing there, basically, right? So I think it's super important on the one side to agree with other departments or maybe with your client or an agency on kind of a service level. So I think it makes a lot of sense to say, okay, if there is a new piece of content, we gonna review and reply within 72 hours or within 1 week or within 48 hours. I think it doesn't matter how long it is. It needs to fit your organization and what's possible, but it needs to be agreed. And only then I think you can really properly plan a deadline for your project and really plan like in advance when something will be ready, right? Productivity killer number 2 is undefined ownership. So I often see, or we say, like, if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So I think if people don't know that they are the one that need to take a decision, nothing will happen. Sometimes if people don't know who's the owner, multiple people will start to work on something without knowing from each other. So you have double work, basically. It's also often the case that your colleagues basically don't know that their help is really required. They're just like not really informed. At the same time, you don't want to over communicate all the time, because then you will steal a lot of time from them, and maybe this will also lead to like less replies for your things, because they feel like, hey, I already received 10 emails from you. It's not really important, right? So what I recommend here is like, yeah, if you send out emails, really think about who should be in an email, right? In an email thread, or if you have a chat or something, really think about the people that need to be involved, right? And then last but not least, sometimes there are stakeholders that really need to be involved, but you just forgot them to involve them. Or there are stakeholders that just where you just missed out, like the approvals, right? Can be really bad, especially if you are like in a regulated industry and you already pressed published or something, and then you recognize, oh, compliance haven't had a check, and now we run into a legal issue and somebody might sue us. Not nice. So definitely not a really good feeling. But the good thing is you can just fix it quickly right away. It's not so hard to fix it. So here is my productivity booster tip number 2. Clear roles and ownership. Sounds easy. At the end, it is also easy. What I created here is a very simple but helpful framework you can apply right away. Basically, before you start into a project, before you start into something, you just need to ask 3 questions, not more. Who's creating your file? Who's managing the project and communication? And who needs to review and approve something, right? Sounds easy, but give you an example. There is the product team coming to you and say, to you marketing, and say, we have a new product we want to launch. Please build a campaign. All right. And then you have your starting point. Then you really need to think about, okay, who's managing this project? How do we handle communication? This should normally be like the project manager. In most cases, it's a marketing manager, brand manager, account manager on the agency side, somebody responsible. Then you need to know who's creating my files. Do we need like a film producer? Is it a designer, a freelancer, internal, external? Who's basically responsible to create the actual file, do like the creative stuff? And then last but not least, you want to know who needs to review and approve the content. In this case, it should be the product team or the one that basically asked for the campaign. Maybe there are more people you need to involve. Maybe there's also the VP sales that needs to be involved, or there's the legal department that needs to be involved. So you need to be sure about that. Cool thing is just ask those 3 questions and you will have a framework wide array. Write it down, make it clear, then share it with everybody like, hey, those people create files. This is the person that owns the project, and those are the ones that will review. Fine for everybody. Easy. From there, you automatically have basically 2 review steps. So you have one side, a creative review and a content review, we call it. So first thing what I recommend is that the content creator typically shares the first version of a file with the project manager. And then we have kind of a creative review here. And once they are fine and have a version they approve, the project manager is going to share this version with the client, can be an internal or external, the client basically for content review and approval. And let's say if there is any feedback and things to change, then in most cases it makes sense that this project manager is kind of playing the filter in between. So taking the client feedback, making sure just the essential is there and everybody's easy to understand and no more questions are there, and then gives like the full package of change requests back to the content creator. And this way the content creators are not stressed out, they don't lose any time, and they can just focus on being creative and not like on communication. What do you do if your process is a bit more complicated and more people are involved? It's also not a big deal. You can use exactly the same questions again and just extend your workflow. So in this case, you just say, yes, there is another part. Who needs to review? It's not just a client, but in this case, it's also compliance, let's say legal or technical. You just add a review step into your process. You just make sure they are part of your reviewer list. And we call it, for example, compliance review. Very easy. Doesn't matter how large or big your organization it is, you can always structure it with this framework. It can look like this. So this is maybe an advanced tip, basically for the productivity booster number 2. So what I recommend is to use kind of a tool or anything, or at least see it as a Kanban process. So ideally you have Kanban process steps where you just say the first part of it is a creative review, and those people are involved. And then the second part is a client review, and here are all the clients, the people that are involved on the client side. And once they approved it, it goes into the compliance review, right? And a Kanban process software will help you with that. Productivity killer number 3, inconsistent workflows. Of course, I could talk days about workflows and things like that, but let's break it down. What the problem is and maybe why you need consistent workflows. So if there is no workflow, you then have an unclear status of the project. So how do you know the status of a project if it's not clear how files and content is going through the approval machine, right? How can you even commit to any deadlines if you don't know what all the steps are on the way to publish it? You really need to know who has approved something at a certain time, and you need to be on top of like who still needs to give you feedback. And if you are not aware of this and if you don't know this, then it's pretty hard basically to go into the next steps. From there, it's often a problem if there is no clear workflow and an inconsistent workflow that you don't know where to find the actual version of a file. It's your problem, but it's often also your reviewer's problem that they don't know where's the file. Has Niklas sent me that via email? I know it was in Microsoft Teams. Really? No, it was a presentation on SharePoint. And then you really struggle to find the right information, and that kills your productivity. It's super annoying. And I think it's just cumbersome for everybody involved. It's a really bad feeling if you don't know where is the latest version, right? And also you will be constantly unsure about the next steps and the timing. You will constantly have this feeling of like, have I done anything? You're really stressed out. Oh no, I've forgotten this person. It's because there is no clear workflow and you don't know the next steps, and it's not always defined. And this is an uncertainty. I think that's not necessary. And this is, I think, where a clear workflow comes into play, right? Let's take a look at the productivity booster and what you can do about it. So here on the next slide is a example workflow you could use to optimize your marketing collaboration and your content creation and approval processes, right? The good thing is I will explain you each step of this process, and then you can pick the parts that will help you and work for you. I know every workflow is kind of individual. You use different software tools. Some of you will use Microsoft Teams or the Slack. You will use another project management software, and maybe you have individual parts. That's all clear. But what I want to show you is basically how to structure your workflow and look at it like holistically and be clear about each step in the workflow to make it scalable. So let's start here on the left side. What I recommend if you have like a new content project, a new campaign, start by setting up your project, ideally in your project management software. So if you work again like with Jira or Asana, have everything in place, use that. Start there. Start with the brief. So take like the overall scope of the campaign, say what are the objectives, write down who will create the files, right? Content creators, who will manage the project, and who is responsible for approval, right? Just write it down there, then write down what the deadline is and basically say how many review rounds you might want to have for this and when this content should be published. I think it also makes sense like to write down all the different assets you want to have as part of it. So if it's like a video, a website, all those things, be clear about it and make notes in your project management software. Then from there, I often think it helps to have kind of an ideation round before you really go into the production stage. You are a pro, right? I think you know all about this, but yeah, I think it just makes sense to bring all the content creators together, maybe your brand managers, all of them, and ideate a bit more on your initial idea for the campaign altogether. You can do it online or offline. If you do it online, there are tools like Miro board and things like that will help you to really brainstorm and work together. The good part is if you do it together, I think you will have a lot more alignment later on when you really produce the things, and less questions later on because you already aligned on things together. Then as the next step, once you are clear here, start with your first version, the first draft of your file coming from your content creators. You can then share, review, and approve this content all together. either via the channel you have agreed upon. So again, like it can be a repeating meeting, it can be always via Slack and then this document, or you can use a software review and approval software to share your file and then collect like feedback on top of it. Collect all the feedback, discuss it, align it, and then create a new version basically of your file. Upload it again and repeat this process until you come to a point where you say, now it's ready to be published. And all your reviewers, all your stakeholders that need to be involved have approved your file. To simplify this process, and I think this is often a part of confusion, is where do I see updates on the projects? Where do I get notifications about the project? So what helps is to say, let's define, for example, a Slack channel or a Teams channel, or let's always take this project card in our project management software to share updates and then agree on this. And then whenever something is happening, just update it here. So saying, hey, the first version is ready, please give me feedback. Then say, now the feedback round 1 is closed. I'm going to edit the changes. Now second version is ready. Now we still have 3 weeks left. Please be aware of it. Things like that. Try to hold everybody in the loop about your project. I think this really makes sense. Will give you a good feeling of transparency, will all help all the others to be on top of things and not go like crazy. And yeah, I think it's a helpful addition, for example, if you work with a review and approval software, to send your notifications automatically into a certain other tool. So send all the notifications into Asana or send them automatically into your Slack channel. Makes things a lot easier. Last but not least, I think there's a point that most people forget about. So normally it doesn't stop with publishing your content. Normally it's like, okay, what are we going to do with the completed version? Do we save it with multiple resolutions in our digital asset management solution? Do we save it in a certain folder for future use cases? And if you are regulated, like in the pharmaceutical industry or something, you might want to have a report about all the changes and all the change requests you received. Some of the software tools will allow you to download a report for compliance reasons, and then you can just save that somewhere in your folder. It's just important to be clear about it and align on it and say, this is the process and this is also part of the process, and you are going to download the report by the end, right? All of that will help you, but also all the stakeholders involved, to have a way better feeling when creating content and to become a lot more productive by the end. Promise, right? So from here, what can you do? You could also consider at this point to work with a professional review and approval solution. What do they do for you? Online proving tools, basically, they fill the gap between the content creation and the distribution part of things. So they replace all this email, Slack, Teams, phone meeting chaos with one simple solution.